O.J. Simpson's rise and fall remains one of the most infamous sagas in American crime history. At first glance, his story seemed destined to be remembered only for glory. Born Orenthal James Simpson in 1947, he grew up in San Francisco, raised primarily by his mother after his father left the family. Childhood was not easy. Poverty weighed heavily, and O.J. was diagnosed with rickets, leaving his legs bowed. Doctors doubted he would ever live an athletic life. Yet by sheer determination, he overcame those limitations and found salvation on the football field. At the University of Southern California, Simpson became a star. His explosive runs, agility, and ability to outpace defenders turned him into a college legend. In 1968, he won the Heisman Trophy, cementing his place as one of the greatest college football players of all time. His transition to the NFL was seamless. Drafted by the Buffalo Bills, he went on to become one of the most celebrated running backs in history. In 1973, he became the first player ever to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, a record that stood as a symbol of his dominance. But Simpson was more than just an athlete. Charismatic, handsome, and marketable, he transitioned into acting and broadcasting. He starred in commercials, films, and television shows. His charm made him a household name, transcending sports into mainstream American culture. By the 1980s, O.J. Simpson wasn't just a football player, he was a celebrity icon. Yet behind the public persona, darker realities were present. Simpson's marriage to Nicole Brown, whom he met in the late 1970s, was plagued by accusations of abuse. Friends recalled bruises, emotional manipulation, and a cycle of charm followed by violence. Police were called to the Simpson home on more than one occasion. Still, as is often the case with the rich and famous, many of these incidents faded from public view. Nicole eventually filed for divorce in 1992, citing irreconcilable differences. Though separated, their lives remained intertwined, a volatile mix of love, anger, and obsession. On June 12, 1994, tragedy struck. Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside her Brentwood condo. Nicole had been stabbed multiple times, her throat slashed in a frenzied attack. Goldman, who had come to return a pair of glasses left at a restaurant, was also stabbed repeatedly as if caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The crime scene was horrific. Pools of blood, violent struggle, and a sense of rage frozen in the aftermath. Almost immediately, suspicion turned toward O.J. Simpson. Police questioned him, and evidence began to mount. Blood drops matching his DNA found at the scene. A bloody glove discovered on his property, and cuts on his hand he could not fully explain. Days later, when Simpson failed to turn himself in, the situation escalated into one of the most surreal media spectacles of the decade. On June 17, 1994, Americans tuned in to live television to witness what became known as the White Bronco chase. With his friend Al Cowlings behind the wheel, Simpson sat in the back of a white Ford Bronco, threatening suicide while police cars followed in a low-speed pursuit across Los Angeles freeways. Helicopters tracked the vehicle, broadcasting images to an audience of nearly 95 million people. Offices, bars, and homes across the nation paused to watch. It was no longer just a criminal investigation. It had become a national obsession. When Simpson was finally arrested, the stage was set for the trial of the century. The prosecution believed their case was airtight. DNA evidence tied Simpson to the murders with overwhelming certainty. A trail of blood led from the crime scene to his home. The bloody glove found at his property matched the one found at Nicole's home. The motive, they argued, was jealousy, control, and rage over a woman who had tried to break free. But the defense, led by Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, and later joined by F. Lee Bailey, dismantled the prosecution's narrative piece by piece. They attacked the credibility of the LAPD, pointing to a history of corruption and racism, particularly highlighting Detective Mark Fuhrman, who had a past of making racist remarks. The defense suggested evidence may have been contaminated or even planted. In one of the most iconic moments of the trial, Simpson was asked to try on the gloves allegedly worn during the murders. Struggling to pull them over latex-covered hands, Simpson uttered the words that Cochran would later turn into a mantra for the defense. "They don't fit." Cochran seized the moment, delivering the unforgettable line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The trial lasted nearly 9 months. Day after day, the media covered every angle, from courtroom sketches to heated commentary. Celebrities, journalists, and everyday Americans debated his guilt. The racial undertones were undeniable. Many in the African American community saw Simpson as a victim of a justice system that had historically been biased and brutal toward black men, while others believed the evidence proved his guilt beyond question. On October 3, 1995, the verdict was announced. Millions tuned in to hear the words, "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted, gasps, cries, and relief. For Simpson, it was freedom, but the public was divided. Some celebrated what they saw as justice in the face of systemic racism. Others were outraged, convinced a murderer had walked free. Though acquitted in criminal court, Simpson's troubles were far from over. In 1997, the victims' families pursued a civil lawsuit. This time, the jury found Simpson liable for wrongful death, ordering him to pay $33.5 million in damages. Financially, Simpson's life crumbled. He lost endorsement deals, acting roles, and the public adoration he once enjoyed. Years later, in 2007, Simpson returned to headlines once again, this time for an armed robbery in Las Vegas. Along with a group of men, he stormed a hotel room to reclaim sports memorabilia he claimed had been stolen from him. The incident quickly spiraled, with guns involved and hostages terrified. In 2008, Simpson was convicted of multiple charges, including kidnapping and armed robbery. This time, there was no media circus, no national debate. He was sentenced to 33 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 9. In 2017, Simpson was granted parole and released after serving 9 years. He emerged into a world that no longer viewed him as a sports hero or celebrity. Instead, he became a pariah, a man defined not by his accomplishments but by the shadow of murder, scandal, and crime. Today, the O.J. Simpson case continues to haunt American culture. It raised uncomfortable questions about race, celebrity, media, and justice. It showed the extent to which fame could shield, or fail to shield, individuals from accountability. For many, the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman remain unresolved emotionally, no matter what the verdict declared. And so, O.J.'s legacy is not just about touchdowns or records, nor even about the trial itself. It is about the uneasy intersection of fame, violence, and the law. A reminder that even the most celebrated figures can fall, and when they do, the entire world will watch. Robert Downey Jr. Story is one of the most dramatic arcs of self-destruction and redemption in modern Hollywood. Today, many know him as the face of Iron Man, the witty and charismatic genius at the center of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But before his extraordinary comeback, Downey lived through years of addiction, crime, arrests, and prison time that nearly ended his career forever. His rise, fall, and eventual return remain a testament to the fragility of fame and the relentless grip of substance abuse. Born in New York City in 1965, Robert Downey Jr. was the son of avant-garde filmmaker Robert Downey Sr. and actress Elsie Downey. From his earliest days, Hollywood was his playground. But this playground carried dangers. His father struggled with substance abuse and was open about introducing his son to drugs at a young age. Robert later admitted he was only 6 years old when he first tried marijuana with his father. What began as a father-son bonding ritual planted the seeds of a lifelong battle with addiction. Despite this chaotic upbringing, Downey displayed extraordinary talent. By the 1980s, he was recognized as a gifted young actor, blending natural charisma with a magnetic screen presence. He joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1985, though his stint was brief. Soon after, he transitioned into films and quickly gained critical recognition. In 1992, his portrayal of Charlie Chaplin in Chaplin earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Hollywood viewed him as one of the most talented actors of his generation, capable of transforming into any role with brilliance and depth. But even at the peak of this early success, drugs shadowed his every step. Cocaine, heroin, and alcohol became regular companions. Friends and co-stars often spoke about his charm, but also about his volatility. The industry whispered that he was both a genius and a danger to himself. By the mid-1990s, Downey's substance abuse spiraled into legal trouble. In 1996, police stopped him for speeding, and inside his car they found heroin, cocaine, and an unloaded .357 Magnum handgun. The incident made headlines. Hollywood's rising star caught with a dangerous mix of narcotics and a firearm. For most actors, this might have been a wake-up call. For Downey, it was only the beginning of a long descent. Soon after that arrest, another disturbing event unfolded. Downey, intoxicated, wandered into a neighbor's home and fell asleep in a child's bed. The bizarre episode highlighted just how far he had slipped into the grip of addiction. The courts ordered rehabilitation programs and probation, but time after time, Downey failed to comply. He skipped drug tests, relapsed, and violated probation terms. Each violation led to harsher consequences. In 1999, the law finally caught up with him. After failing yet another court-mandated drug test, a judge sentenced him to 3 years in California's state prison. For a man who had once walked red carpets and accepted critical acclaim, the reality of prison life was brutal. He was housed at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility in Corcoran, a stark contrast to the glamorous Hollywood lifestyle he once lived. Life inside prison stripped away the illusions of celebrity. Downey faced the same restrictions, routines, and dangers as other inmates. For him, the humiliation was compounded by the fact that his downfall was entirely public. Tabloids splashed his mugshots across front pages. Directors, once eager to cast him, declared him uninsurable. Hollywood moved on without him, and his reputation became synonymous with wasted potential. Downey served roughly a year before being released on parole, but freedom did not bring stability. He relapsed again and again, caught in the relentless cycle of addiction. In 2000, he was arrested in Palm Springs after police found him wandering through the streets intoxicated. In 2001, another arrest followed, this time at a hotel where he was discovered under the influence. He was fired from the hit TV show Ally McBeal, a role that had temporarily reignited his career. His professional and personal life seemed unsalvageable. By the early 2000s, many believed Robert Downey Jr.'s career was over for good. Hollywood has never been kind to those who appear unreliable, and Downey's track record was catastrophic. Offers dried up. Insurance companies refused to back productions that wanted to hire him. He was labeled a liability, a once promising talent consumed by his demons. But unlike so many tragic Hollywood stories, Downey's did not end in permanent exile. Slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild. With the help of therapy, support systems, and an unwavering determination, Downey embraced sobriety. His wife, producer Susan Levin, played a critical role, standing by him as he fought to stay clean. He credited martial arts, meditation, and a newfound sense of discipline for keeping him grounded. Even so, Hollywood was hesitant. He had burned bridges and lost trust. But in the mid-2000s, directors like Shane Black and Richard Linklater gave him small but significant opportunities. Films such as Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and A Scanner darkly reminded audiences of his talent. Slowly, whispers in the industry shifted. Could Downey make a comeback? The answer came in 2008, when Marvel Studios took a massive gamble by casting him as Tony Stark in Iron Man. The parallels between Stark and Downey were uncanny. A man of brilliance and charm undone by his flaws, forced to rebuild himself into something greater. Audiences connected not just with the character, but with the actor's real-life journey. The film became a massive success, launching one of the most profitable franchises in cinema history. Downey went from being Hollywood's cautionary tale to one of its greatest comeback stories. The man who once slept in a stranger's bed after a drug binge now stood as a global icon, inspiring millions with his resilience. But the shadow of his prison years remained. In interviews, he has spoken candidly about his past, acknowledging the damage he caused to himself and others. Looking back, Downey's time in prison was both a punishment and a turning point. It revealed the depths of his addiction, forced him to confront the consequences of his choices, and ultimately became part of the foundation of his redemption. He has often said that hitting rock bottom was what allowed him to climb back up. The haunting question his story leaves behind is this: how many other gifted lives never escape the cycle? Downey's comeback is extraordinary, but for every success, countless others remain trapped in the spiral of addiction, their potential lost forever. His story is both a warning and a beacon of hope, proof that recovery is possible, but only with relentless determination and support. Robert Downey Jr.'s life will always be remembered in 2 acts. The first, a tragic collapse, ending with him behind bars, nearly forgotten. The second, a phoenix-like rise in which he reclaimed his place as one of the most bankable and beloved actors in the world. His prison sentence, while devastating, became the crucible in which his second life was forged. Martha Stewart was once the embodiment of domestic perfection. To millions of Americans, she represented elegance, precision, and the comforting idea that life could be beautiful, orderly, and successful all at once. Her empire spanned television shows, magazines, books, and a line of branded products that turned her into one of the most recognizable names in American households. But behind the curated image of flawless pies, immaculate homes, and timeless craft, a scandal was quietly unfolding. One that would land Stewart in federal prison and permanently alter her reputation. Born in 1941 in Jersey City, New Jersey, Martha Stewart grew up in a large working-class family. From an early age, she displayed a sharp intelligence and remarkable discipline. She modeled as a teenager, studied at Barnard College, and built a successful career as a stockbroker before transitioning into catering. It was here that her empire began. Her eye for detail, presentation, and taste set her apart. By the late 1970s, she had authored best-selling cookbooks, and by the 1990s, she was a household name. Her magazine, Martha Stewart Living, along with her television show of the same name, reached millions. She became not just a personality but a brand. She represented an aspiration. The idea that through hard work, taste, and discipline, ordinary life could be elevated into something extraordinary. Stewart built a company that reflected her image, Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia, which grew to be worth billions. In 1999, her company went public on the New York Stock Exchange, and Stewart became America's first female self-made billionaire. But at the turn of the century, as she stood at the pinnacle of success, a decision made in secrecy would unravel everything. In December 2001, Stewart owned nearly 4,000 shares of ImClone Systems, a biotech company run by her friend Samuel Waxall. ImClone was waiting for FDA approval of a new cancer drug, Erbitux. When word leaked that the FDA would reject the application, insiders began selling off shares before the news went public. Waxall himself tried to dump stock, and his family members rushed to do the same. On December 27th, Stewart instructed her broker to sell all her shares of ImClone, avoiding a loss of around $45,000. At first glance, the amount seemed almost trivial compared to her massive fortune, but the timing raised questions. Just one day later, the stock plummeted. To investigators, Stewart's trade looked suspiciously like insider trading. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation. Soon, the FBI became involved. The media pounced, fascinated by the image of America's queen of domestic perfection potentially entangled in white-collar crime. At first, Stewart denied wrongdoing. She claimed she had a standing agreement with her broker to sell if the stock fell below $60 per share. But as investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies surfaced. Phone records showed unusual activity. Her assistant testified about the suspicious timing. Most damaging of all was the perception that she had lied to federal investigators. In 2003, Stewart was formally indicted on charges of securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and making false statements to federal agents. The trial began in early 2004, and the spectacle was unlike anything the lifestyle mogul had ever endured. Instead of being praised for her recipes or home decor, she was scrutinized in a federal courtroom. Prosecutors argued that Stewart knowingly acted on insider information provided by her broker. They portrayed her as someone who thought her wealth and power placed her above the law. Her defense team countered that the case was overblown, that Stewart had simply made a routine stock sale, and that she was being unfairly targeted because of her fame. But the jury was not convinced. In March 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. She was acquitted of the more serious charge of securities fraud, but the damage was done. The sentence was a bombshell. Stewart was ordered to serve 5 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised release, and pay fines. On October 8, 2004, she reported to federal prison Camp Alderson in West Virginia, often nicknamed Camp Cupcake for its relatively comfortable conditions compared to harsher prisons. Yet for Stewart, the humiliation was profound. She had gone from billionaire business mogul to inmate number 55170-054. Inside prison, Stewart was treated like everyone else. She wore a khaki uniform, shared duties such as cleaning and kitchen work, and lived under strict schedules. Inmates reportedly respected her, though she was often the subject of fascination. She taught classes on cooking, gardening, and craft projects, blending her public persona into prison life. Yet behind the appearances, Stewart later admitted that her time in prison was one of the most difficult periods of her life. She described it as horrifying and a crushing blow. Her release in March 2005 was covered by a media circus. Reporters camped outside, snapping photographs as Stewart walked free. But the image of Martha Stewart had changed forever. She was no longer only the domestic goddess of American culture. She was also a convicted felon, her name forever linked with scandal. Yet remarkably, Stewart did not fade away. She staged a comeback. Soon after her release, she returned to television with The Martha Stewart Show, and she embraced her new public image with surprising resilience. She leaned into her reputation, even joking about her prison time in interviews. But while she regained much of her influence, the perception of perfection that once defined her brand was gone. For many Americans, Stewart was no longer just an aspirational figure. She was a symbol of entitlement, someone who used privilege to dodge financial losses while others suffered. The Clone scandal and Stewart's imprisonment raised uncomfortable questions about fairness in America's justice system. Did prosecutors pursue her so aggressively because she was a high-profile woman? Or did her fame shield her from harsher consequences? After all, $45,000 was a minor loss compared to the billions at stake. Critics argued that Stewart's downfall was as much about her lies to investigators as the trade itself. That her greatest mistake was not selling stock, but attempting to cover it up. The aftermath of her conviction left Stewart both diminished and strangely more relatable. She became a cautionary tale of hubris, showing how quickly success can collapse when ethics are compromised. Yet she also demonstrated resilience, clawing her way back into relevance. In later years, she would partner with major brands, appear on television alongside celebrities like Snoop Dogg, and reinvent herself as a kind of elder stateswoman of lifestyle entertainment. Still, the shadow of her prison sentence lingers. For those who admired her empire of order and control, the scandal revealed that beneath the polished image was a person capable of poor judgment and dishonesty. It shattered the illusion of perfection and reminded the world that even the wealthiest and most admired are not immune to accountability. Martha Stewart's prison time was short, but its impact was long-lasting. It reshaped her identity in the public eye, from untouchable mogul to flawed icon. Her story continues to provoke debate. Was she unfairly targeted, or was she finally held responsible? Did her punishment fit the crime, or was it a symbolic gesture meant to prove that no one, not even Martha Stewart, is above the law? The haunting takeaway is this: trust, once broken, is not easily restored. Stewart's empire was built on trust, the trust of audiences who believed in her taste, her judgment, and her integrity. The Clone scandal fractured that trust forever, and though she continues to thrive in business, her name will always carry the weight of those 5 months in prison. Phil Spector's story is one of music genius turned to darkness, of innovation and brilliance collapsing into paranoia and violence. For decades, he was celebrated as one of the most influential figures in popular music, a producer who shaped the sound of an era. Yet in the end, he would be remembered not for his wall of sound, but for the walls of a prison cell. His name, once synonymous with artistry, became inseparable from murder. Born Harvey Philip Spector in the Bronx in 1939, his childhood was marked by trauma. When he was just 9 years old, his father committed suicide, a devastating event that left a permanent mark. His family moved to Los Angeles soon after, where Spector immersed himself in music as an escape from pain. He was a prodigy, gifted with an ear for arrangement and a restless drive to create. By his late teens, he had formed a group called the Teddy Bears. Their single to know, "Him is to love him," a title taken from the words on his father's gravestone, climbed to #1 on the Billboard charts in 1958. It was a hauntingly personal anthem that revealed Spector's ability to channel emotion into sound. From there, his career skyrocketed. In the 1960s, Spector became one of the most powerful producers in music. His wall of sound technique, layering instruments, vocals, and reverb to create a dense symphonic effect, defined pop music of the era. He worked with groups like the Ronettes, the Crystals, and the Righteous Brothers, producing hits that remain classics today. Songs like Be My Baby and You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin' carried his unmistakable touch. By the time he collaborated with the Beatles on Let It Be in 1970 and produced albums for artists like George Harrison and John Lennon, his legend was cemented. He was rich, powerful, and eccentric, a man whose influence reached every corner of the music industry. But behind the genius was a deeply troubled personality. Spector's eccentricities grew into something darker. Colleagues described him as controlling, volatile, and paranoid. He carried guns, often pulling them out during recording sessions. Stories circulated of him pointing weapons at artists, a blend of intimidation and instability. Singer Darlene Love and others who worked with him later recounted how terrifying he could be when his temper flared. The music industry tolerated his behavior because of his talent, but those closest to him knew he was dangerous. By the 1980s and 1990s, Spector had largely withdrawn from public life. He lived in a sprawling mansion in Alhambra, California, known as the Pyrenees Castle, surrounded by isolation and his growing paranoia. Friends were few, and rumors of his instability grew louder. On the night of February 3, 2003, the world would see the full extent of that darkness. Actress Lana Clarkson, known for her roles in the 1980s cult films Barbarian Queen and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, met Spector at the House of Blues in Los Angeles, where she was working as a hostess. Spector invited her back to his mansion. Hours later, Clarkson was dead, shot through the mouth with a revolver. The details of that night remain chilling. Neighbors reported hearing a gunshot, followed by Spector emerging from the home, allegedly telling his chauffeur, "I think I killed someone." Inside, Clarkson's body was discovered slumped in a chair, her purse on her shoulder as if she had been preparing to leave. Spector insisted the shooting was an accident, claiming Clarkson had taken her own life. But investigators found inconsistencies. Gunshot residue suggested the weapon had been fired at close range, and forensic evidence contradicted Spector's story. More damning were accounts from multiple women who later testified that Spector had a history of threatening them with guns when they tried to leave his home. The trial that followed became a media sensation. In 2007, Spector's first trial ended in a hung jury, with jurors deadlocked over whether the evidence proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The spectacle showcased the complexity of trying a celebrity, particularly one with decades of influence and wealth behind him. But prosecutors refused to back down. In 2009, a retrial began. This time, the prosecution presented a more focused narrative that Spector, prone to violent outbursts and terrified of abandonment, had killed Clarkson in a fit of rage when she tried to leave. The testimonies of other women painted a disturbing pattern: late-night encounters, alcohol, and the sudden appearance of a gun. Clarkson, they argued, had become the final victim in a long line of Spector's abusive behavior. The defense maintained it was suicide, portraying Clarkson as a struggling actress in despair. But the jury was not convinced. In April 2009, Phil Spector was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. The verdict marked the fall of a giant. The man who had once defined the sound of pop music was now inmate number F382. He was housed in the California State Prison System, a frail, aging man whose health quickly deteriorated behind bars. Photographs of Spector in court, bald, gaunt, and visibly diminished, became symbols of how far he had fallen. The public's reaction was conflicted. For some, it was a relief, a long overdue reckoning for a man whose dangerous behavior had been excused for far too long. For others, it was a tragic end to a career that had once brought joy to millions. Music historians grappled with how to separate the art from the artist, how to acknowledge the brilliance of his contributions while not ignoring the violence of his crimes. Spector appealed his conviction, but his efforts failed. He remained in prison until his death in 2021 at the age of 81. The official cause was complications related to COVID-19. He died not as a celebrated icon, but as a convicted murderer, his legacy permanently scarred. The haunting reflection of Spector's story lies in the dangerous intersection of genius and power. For decades, his brilliance excused his behavior. Those around him ignored or minimized his threats, chalking it up to eccentricity. In the end, that tolerance allowed him to continue unchecked until someone died. His prison sentence was not just a punishment for one crime, but a symbol of accountability finally catching up to a man who had long been shielded by his fame. Phil Spector's life remains a cautionary tale. His music still echoes, his innovation still studied, but the name Spector conjures images not of sound, but of violence. He is remembered as much for the death of Lana Clarkson as for the songs that once defined an era. And perhaps that is the darkest legacy of all, that his art and his crime are now forever intertwined. For millions around the world, Lindsay Lohan's face was once synonymous with innocence, charm, and a certain brand of Disney magic. She was the freckled redhead who captured hearts in The Parent Trap, the rebellious teen in Freaky Friday, and the unforgettable lead in Mean Girls. Her talent was undeniable, her charisma magnetic, and for a moment, it seemed Lindsay Lohan was destined to become one of Hollywood's brightest stars. But behind the cameras and flashing lights was a young woman spiraling out of control. What began as small missteps quickly escalated into a cycle of arrests, courtrooms, and time in jail, turning one of America's most beloved actresses into a cautionary tale of fame, excess, and self-destruction. Lohan was born in New York City in 1986, the daughter of Dina and Michael Lohan. From an early age, she was pushed toward the spotlight. Modeling jobs and commercials came first, with her image plastered on televisions across the country before she was even a teenager. At 11 years old, she landed her breakout role in Disney's 1998 remake of The Parent Trap. The film was a smash hit, not only because of its nostalgic charm, but because Lindsay was extraordinary, playing both twins with remarkable skill and maturity. Overnight, she became a household name. The years that followed seemed like a dream. Lohan transitioned seamlessly into teen stardom, with major roles in Freaky Friday, 2003, Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, 2004, and of course, Mean Girls, 2004, which solidified her place as one of the most promising young talents of her generation. She was funny, relatable, and effortlessly likable. But behind the scenes, her life was already showing cracks. Her parents' tumultuous relationship made headlines, with public fights, divorce, and her father's legal troubles casting a long shadow. The pressure of Hollywood only amplified these issues. By her late teens, Lohan was spending more time in Los Angeles nightclubs than on sets. Paparazzi followed her everywhere, capturing images of her stumbling out of clubs, cigarettes in hand, often surrounded by a rotating cast of equally troubled young celebrities. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of the 2000s party girl culture, but unlike others, she had the added burden of trying to maintain a career. The trouble truly began in 2007. That May, Lohan was arrested for driving under the influence after crashing her Mercedes-Benz into a curb in Beverly Hills. Cocaine was found at the scene, though she was not initially charged for it. Just 2 months later, in July, she was arrested again, this time for drunk driving, cocaine possession, and driving with a suspended license after chasing another vehicle in a reckless, high-speed pursuit. The image of Lohan, once America's sweetheart, being booked in a police station was shocking. The courts handed down probation, mandatory alcohol education classes, and community service. But Lindsay struggled to comply. She missed classes, skipped hearings, and tested positive for drugs while on probation. Each misstep was met with more jail time, though her stays were brief. Overcrowding in Los Angeles jails often meant celebrities like Lohan served only hours or days of their sentences. In 2007, she served just 84 minutes of a one-day jail sentence before being released. The cycle became endless: arrest, sentencing, rehab, release, relapse. In 2010, after failing to complete her court-ordered alcohol education program, she was sentenced to 90 days in jail. Cameras swarmed as she arrived at the courthouse in designer sunglasses and a defiant expression. But again, due to overcrowding, she served only 14 days. Later that same year, she was jailed again for violating probation after testing positive for cocaine. Her mugshots became almost as famous as her movie posters. Each one told a different story: exhaustion, defiance, fear. The young girl who once smiled on red carpets was now a woman caught in a very public downward spiral. Her struggles with addiction were no secret. She entered rehab multiple times, including stints at the Betty Ford Center. Each attempt at recovery was met with hope by fans, but relapse always seemed to follow. Hollywood, once eager to cast her, grew wary. Productions halted, contracts were canceled, and insurance companies refused to cover her. Directors complained about her unreliability on set. In 2012, a judge bluntly told her, "You need to live your life in a more mature way. Stop the nightclubbing and focus on your work." But by then, her reputation was already badly damaged. The media's obsession with her downfall only made things worse. Tabloid headlines mocked her stints in jail, paparazzi hounded her relentlessly, and every mistake was amplified for public consumption. Unlike other stars who managed to recover from scandal, Lindsay seemed trapped in an endless cycle of self-destruction. Her mistakes broadcast across the globe in real time. Her most serious legal trouble came in 2011 when she was sentenced to 120 days in jail and 480 hours of community service for violating probation related to a 2007 theft case. She had been accused of stealing a $2,500 necklace from a Los Angeles jewelry store. Though she denied it, security cameras captured her trying on the piece and walking out without paying. She later returned it, but prosecutors pressed charges. The case added another layer to her already chaotic reputation. By the mid-2010s, the frequency of her arrests slowed, but the damage was already done. She had become less of an actress and more of a headline. Her attempts to return to Hollywood, including television cameos and indie films, were met with skepticism. The trust she had once earned from fans, directors, and the public had eroded. Lohan eventually moved abroad, spending time in London, Greece, and Dubai, away from the relentless paparazzi of Los Angeles. She opened a nightclub in Mykonos, dabbled in fashion, and slowly began trying to rebuild her life outside of Hollywood's glare. In interviews, she spoke about wanting to change, to leave behind the chaos that had defined her 20s. Yet even with distance, her reputation remained forever tied to her time behind bars. For many, she became a symbol of wasted potential, of how fame at a young age could corrode even the brightest of futures. The reflection of Lindsay Lohan's story is not just about one woman's mistakes. It is about an industry that chews up young stars, a media culture that thrives on scandal, and the dangers of excess when combined with celebrity. Her trips to jail may not have been as long or as violent as some others on this list, but they were enough to shift her legacy. From Disney darling to tabloid fixture, her story serves as a haunting reminder of how quickly fame can curdle into infamy. Even today, as she makes efforts to reclaim her career and reputation, the shadow of her past arrests lingers. Lindsay Lohan's story is not one of murder or violence, but it is a tragedy nonetheless. The fall of a young star whose future seemed limitless, undone by addiction, reckless choices, and the unrelenting pressure of a life lived under the spotlight. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. Mike Tyson's name is etched into history as one of the most fearsome boxers ever to step into the ring. At his peak, he was not only a heavyweight champion but a cultural phenomenon, the youngest fighter to win the title, a man who seemed invincible with his explosive power and relentless aggression. He was Iron Mike, the baddest man on the planet. But behind the glitz of his victories and the roar of the crowd was a darker story, a troubled youth, unchecked rage, and a lifestyle spiraling out of control. That darkness eventually caught up with him in 1992, when Tyson was convicted of rape and sent to prison. His fall from the pinnacle of athletic glory to a prison cell remains one of the most shocking turns in sports history. Tyson's journey began in Brooklyn, New York, where he was born in 1966. His childhood was defined by poverty, crime, and violence. Abandoned by his father and raised by a mother who struggled to provide, young Mike grew up in some of the roughest neighborhoods in America. By the time he was 13, he had been arrested more than 30 times for petty crimes and street fights. Tyson's violent streak was clear, but so was his potential. It was in a juvenile detention center that Tyson's raw talent first caught the eye of Bobby Stewart, a counselor and former boxer. Stewart introduced him to legendary trainer Cus D'Amato, who became Tyson's mentor and father figure. Under D'Amato's guidance, Tyson's life transformed. The troubled teen channeled his aggression into boxing, where his natural speed and devastating punching power made him nearly unstoppable. By the mid-1980s, Tyson was rising fast. In 1986, at just 20 years old, he knocked out Trevor Berbick to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. His fights were often short, brutal spectacles ending in devastating knockouts. Fans compared him to a force of nature. With his intimidating presence, ferocious style, and ability to end fights in seconds, he became not just a boxer, but a global icon. But fame and fortune amplified Tyson's demons. Outside the ring, his personal life was chaotic. He married actress Robin Givens in 1988, but the relationship quickly soured. Givens later described him as abusive and unstable in interviews, painting a picture of a man consumed by anger and volatility. Tyson's behavior was erratic, fueled by drugs, alcohol, and reckless spending. Stories of wild parties, luxury cars, and extravagant purchases became tabloid fodder. Even as his personal life unraveled, Tyson remained a dominant force in boxing. But by the early 1990s, cracks were beginning to show. In 1990, in one of the biggest upsets in sports history, Tyson lost his heavyweight title to Buster Douglas in Tokyo. The defeat shocked the world and seemed to mark the beginning of his decline. Then, in July 1991, Tyson was accused of raping 18-year-old Desiree Washington, a contestant in the Miss Black America pageant. Washington claimed Tyson invited her to his hotel room in Indianapolis, where the assault occurred. Tyson denied the allegation, insisting the encounter was consensual. The case quickly drew massive media attention, with the public divided over whether Tyson was guilty or the victim of false accusations. The trial began in January 1992. Prosecutors presented Washington's testimony in harrowing detail, supported by evidence from medical examinations and the hotel staff's accounts. Tyson's defense attempted to discredit her, but the jury found her story credible. After just 10 hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Mike Tyson was guilty of rape and 2 counts of deviant sexual conduct. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The conviction stunned the sports world. Tyson, once celebrated as the ultimate champion, was now a convicted felon. His fall was swift and brutal. On March 26, 1992, he was led away in handcuffs, beginning a prison sentence that would forever alter his legacy. Prison life stripped Tyson of the aura of invincibility he had cultivated. He spent 3 years behind bars before being released on parole in 1995. While incarcerated, he converted to Islam, studied philosophy, and kept himself in shape, but he remained a figure of controversy. Some believed he had been unfairly targeted, while others saw his conviction as long overdue accountability for a man whose violent behavior had long been overlooked. When Tyson returned to boxing, the world watched closely. He reclaimed the heavyweight title in 1996, but his comeback was short-lived. In 1997, during a rematch with Evander Holyfield, Tyson bit off part of Holyfield's ear in one of the most infamous moments in sports history. He was disqualified, fined, and suspended from boxing. The incident cemented his reputation as both a spectacle and a cautionary tale. Despite flashes of his old power, Tyson's later career was defined more by scandal than success. He declared bankruptcy in 2003, his fortune squandered on lavish spending and poor decisions. He was arrested multiple times for assault and drug possession, his demons never far behind. By the time he retired in 2005, the man who once terrified opponents had become a tragic figure, remembered as much for his downfall as his dominance. The reflection of Tyson's story is one of wasted potential and unchecked power. At his best, he was one of the most gifted athletes the world had ever seen. At his worst, he was violent, reckless, and destructive. His conviction for rape remains a stain that cannot be erased, a reminder of the consequences of his actions off the ring. In the years since, Tyson has attempted to rebuild his image. He has appeared in films, written memoirs, and spoken openly about his struggles with addiction and mental health. Some see him as a man who has grown and changed, while others cannot forget the crimes that defined his past. What is undeniable is that Mike Tyson's story is a cautionary tale. It shows how fame, power, and talent can collapse under the weight of personal demons, and how the fall from the top can be as dramatic as the rise. For Tyson, prison was not just a punishment but a turning point, marking the end of his reign and the beginning of a lifelong struggle to redefine himself. For years, Jared Fogle was one of the most recognizable faces in American advertising. Known simply as the Subway Guy, he became a national symbol of weight loss and personal transformation. His story of losing over 200 pounds by eating Subway sandwiches was marketed as inspirational, and the fast food chain built a multi-million-dollar campaign around his image. To millions, Fogle was the smiling everyman success story who proved that discipline and a foot-long sandwich could change your life. But behind the corporate gloss and the smiling commercials was a man harboring disturbing secrets. The revelation of those secrets in 2015 would shock the world. Fogle wasn't just a spokesperson, he was a predator. His crimes would shatter not only his reputation, but also the carefully crafted image of the company that had made him famous. What began as a feel-good advertising campaign ended in scandal, prison, and disgrace. Jared Fogle was born in Indiana in 1977. By his early 20s, he weighed more than 400 pounds, living a sedentary life of fast food and video games. In 1998, while attending Indiana University, he began a self-imposed diet centered on Subway sandwiches. His story was extraordinary, a man losing 245 pounds in just 1 year by eating turkey subs and walking daily. A local newspaper featured his transformation, which soon caught the attention of Subway executives. By 2000, Fogle had become the face of Subway's new advertising push, Commercials showed him proudly holding up his old 62-inch waist jeans, smiling as he explained how Subway had changed his life. The campaign was a massive success. Fogel was not just selling sandwiches. He was selling hope. He appeared on talk shows, visited schools, and became a pop culture figure. His story even influenced a rise in Subway's sales, helping the chain expand globally. For more than a decade, Fogel lived in the public eye. He established the Jared Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at promoting childhood health and combating obesity. He traveled the country speaking at schools, encouraging children to make healthier choices. To parents, he was a safe, relatable role model. To Subway, he was a goldmine. But all the while, beneath the public persona, something sinister was festering. In 2007, whispers about Fogel's disturbing behavior began to surface. A journalist named Rochelle Herman-Walrond, who met Fogel at an event, claimed he made sexually suggestive comments about middle school children. Alarmed, she began secretly recording their conversations. In those recordings, Fogel made shocking statements about his sexual interest in minors. For years, Herman-Walrond tried to alert the authorities, but without physical evidence, the FBI could not move forward. The breakthrough came in 2015. Russell Taylor, the executive director of the Jared Foundation and a close associate of Fogel, was arrested on child pornography charges. Investigators discovered thousands of explicit images and videos in Taylor's possession, many involving children as young as 6. The evidence also revealed Taylor had shared some of this material with Fogel. With Taylor's arrest, the FBI shifted its focus squarely onto Fogel. On July 7, 2015, federal agents raided Fogel's home in Zionsville, Indiana. Neighbors watched in shock as investigators carried out computers and electronics. The image of Fogel, once the clean-cut face of healthy living, was now linked to child exploitation. Within weeks, the full extent of his crimes became clear. Fogel was charged with possessing child pornography and traveling across state lines to engage in illicit sexual conduct with minors. The charges painted a horrifying picture. Prosecutors revealed Fogel had repeatedly paid to have sex with underage girls, some as young as 16, during trips to New York City and other states. He also possessed sexually explicit images of children obtained through Taylor. When the details became public, the shock was immense. Parents who had once welcomed him into schools felt betrayed. Subway, which had built its brand around his story, cut all ties immediately. In press statements, the company expressed disgust and sought to distance itself, but the damage was already done. The man who had sold sandwiches as symbols of health and hope was now exposed as a predator. In August 2015, Fogel agreed to a plea deal. He admitted guilt to one count of traveling to engage in illicit sexual conduct with a minor, and one count of receiving child pornography. As part of the deal, he agreed to pay restitution to 14 victims, totaling $4 million. Each victim received $100,000, an acknowledgement of the lifelong harm caused by his actions. The sentencing hearing in November 2015 was chilling. Victim impact statements described the trauma and devastation he had caused. The prosecution emphasized Fogel's long pattern of predatory behavior, arguing he had exploited his fame and wealth to gain access to vulnerable young people. Fogel, in his statement, claimed he was battling compulsive sexual disorders and apologized, though many saw his words as hollow. The judge was unsparing. Jared Fogel was sentenced to 15 years and 8 months in federal prison, far longer than the defense had requested. In handing down the sentence, Judge Tanya Walton Pratt noted the gravity of his crimes, saying Fogel had excused his criminal conduct by blaming others. The courtroom, once a place where he had been celebrated for his inspiring weight loss story, was now the scene of his downfall. Fogel began serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Colorado. Reports from prison described him as a target for other inmates, many of whom despised sex offenders. He was beaten in 2016 by a fellow prisoner, underscoring how far he had fallen from the pedestal of celebrity. Once a national spokesperson, he was now inmate number 129-19028. The aftermath of Fogel's crimes reverberated far beyond his personal downfall. Subway faced intense scrutiny, accused of ignoring red flags and enabling his behavior for years. Lawsuits were filed by victims who argued the company should have acted sooner. Though Subway denied knowledge of his crimes, the scandal tainted its brand and left a permanent scar on its legacy. For the victims, the damage was irreversible. Many spoke of ongoing trauma, trust issues, and emotional scars that would last a lifetime. For parents across the country, Fogel's crime served as a chilling reminder that predators could hide behind even the most wholesome facades. The haunting reflection of Jared Fogel's story lies in the betrayal. He was trusted by millions, welcomed into schools, celebrated as a role model. He built a brand around health and hope, only to use his fame as cover for predation. His fall was not just a personal tragedy, but a national shock, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Today, Jared Fogel remains behind bars, a disgraced former pitchman whose name has become synonymous not with weight loss, but with betrayal and abuse. His story is not one of redemption, but of corruption, showing how power and influence can be twisted toward the most horrific ends. Wesley Snipes was once one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Known for his martial arts skills, commanding screen presence, and a string of blockbuster hits, Snipes seemed to embody the very idea of a self-made celebrity who had carved out a place at the top of the entertainment world. From his breakout roles in films like New Jack City and White Men Can't Jump to his iconic portrayal of the vampire-hunting anti-hero in the Blade trilogy, Snipes was a cultural force in the 1990s and early 2000s. Yet behind the glamour and fame, he was concealing a secret that would eventually land him in federal prison. Unlike many other celebrity scandals, Snipes' downfall wasn't tied to drugs or violence. It was the crime of tax evasion that brought his career to a screeching halt and left his reputation in ruins. Born in 1962 in Orlando, Florida, Wesley Trent Snipes grew up in the Bronx, New York. His childhood was marked by a mix of discipline and ambition. He was drawn to the performing arts early, studying acting, dance, and martial arts while still in high school. He later attended the State University of New York at Purchase, where he honed his craft in theater. His combination of raw talent and physicality quickly set him apart from his peers. Snipes' big break came in 1987 when he appeared as a street tough in Michael Jackson's Bad Music video, directed by Martin Scorsese. The appearance caught the attention of casting directors and helped launch his film career. Soon, he was starring in a series of successful movies that showcased both his dramatic range and his action star chops. In New Jack City, 1991, he gave a chilling performance as drug lord Nino Brown, a role that made him a household name. In White Men Can't Jump, 1992, he demonstrated his comedic timing alongside Woody Harrelson, cementing his versatility. But it was the Blade trilogy, beginning in 1998, that elevated Snipes to global superstardom. Playing the half-human, half-vampire warrior, Snipes combined martial arts with charisma, creating a character that resonated with audiences and helped pave the way for the modern superhero boom. For a time, he was one of Hollywood's most bankable action heroes, commanding millions per role and enjoying the perks of fame. Yet behind the scenes, Snipes was entangled in a financial web that would soon unravel. At the height of his career, he came into contact with a group of tax protesters who adhered to a bizarre and unfounded belief that income taxes in the United States were unconstitutional and voluntary. The movement, often referred to as tax deniers, peddled pseudo-legal arguments that had been repeatedly rejected by courts. Snipes, perhaps influenced by his desire to shield his wealth, fell under their sway. Beginning in the late 1990s, he stopped filing federal income tax returns altogether, even as he was earning tens of millions of dollars. Between 1999 and 2004, prosecutors estimated that Snipes failed to pay over $7 million in taxes. He also filed false refund claims totaling tens of millions, asserting that the government owed him money. His associates, including Eddie Ray Khan and Douglas Roseil, were part of a fraudulent scheme that encouraged people to defy tax laws. In 2006, the IRS finally acted. Snipes was indicted on multiple counts of tax fraud, conspiracy, and willful failure to file returns. The case against him was massive, involving years of financial records, testimony from former advisors, and evidence of deliberate attempts to evade his responsibilities. For the government, Snipes' prosecution was about more than just recovering lost revenue. It was about sending a message that no one, not even celebrities, was above the law. The trial began in 2008 in Ocala, Florida. Prosecutors argued that Snipes had engaged in a pattern of willful tax evasion, aided by advisors who promoted fraudulent schemes. They pointed to his failure to file returns, his bizarre refund claims, and his active participation in a conspiracy. Snipes' defense team countered that he had been misled by unscrupulous advisors and that his actions, while misguided, were not criminal in intent. They attempted to portray him as a victim of manipulation rather than a calculating fraudster. The trial drew intense media attention, with reporters and fans packing the courthouse to watch the spectacle unfold. For a man once celebrated as a heroic figure on screen, the sight of Snipes defending himself against accusations of cheating the government was a dramatic fall from grace. In February 2008, the jury delivered its verdict. Snipes was acquitted of the most serious felony charges, including conspiracy and filing false refund claims, but he was convicted on 3 misdemeanor counts of willful failure to file tax returns. Each count carried a potential sentence of up to 1 year in prison. The judge, seeking to make an example of Snipes, sentenced him to the maximum, 3 years behind bars. In December 2010, after exhausting his appeals, Snipes reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in McKean, Pennsylvania. For the next 3 years, the man who once wielded swords on screen and battled vampires found himself confined to a cell, stripped of the fame and wealth that had once defined him. During his time in prison, reports suggested he kept a low profile, teaching martial arts to fellow inmates and maintaining his physical fitness. Snipes was released in April 2013 and placed under house arrest for a brief period before regaining his full freedom. His career, however, had been derailed. Hollywood had moved on, and the once bankable star found himself struggling to reclaim his former glory. He made small appearances in films like The Expendables 3 and independent projects, but the momentum of his earlier career was gone. In reflection, Snipes' downfall was not the result of violence or scandal, but of arrogance and poor judgment. His refusal to meet a basic civic responsibility, paying taxes, became a symbol of celebrity hubris. For the public, his case was a reminder that fame does not exempt anyone from the law. Wesley Snipes' story remains haunting in its irony. He played heroes on screen, men who upheld justice and fought against corruption. Yet in his real life, he chose to ignore the rules that applied to everyone else, convinced he had found a loophole where none existed. His prison sentence was a stark reminder that reality is far less forgiving than Hollywood fiction. Today, Wesley Snipes continues to work, albeit in smaller roles. He occasionally speaks about his prison experience, framing it as a chapter of growth and reflection. But the shadow of his conviction lingers, a permanent part of his legacy. For audiences who once admired his strength and charisma, the memory of his fall serves as both a cautionary tale and a sobering reminder that even the brightest stars can dim when they believe themselves untouchable. Felicity. Huffman was never the type of celebrity who seemed destined for scandal. A respected actress with decades of steady work behind her, she had built a reputation as a versatile performer, beloved for both her dramatic and comedic roles. She earned acclaim on stage, in independent films, and most famously on television as Lynette Scavo, the harried but sharp-witted suburban mother on Desperate Housewives. Unlike many Hollywood stars, Huffman kept a relatively low profile outside of her work. She was married to fellow actor William H. Macy, with whom she raised 2 daughters, and she projected the image of a grounded, relatable figure in an industry often defined by excess. That wholesome image shattered in March 2019, when Huffman's name appeared in headlines across the world. She had been charged in connection with Operation Varsity Blues, a sprawling FBI investigation into a nationwide college admissions bribery scandal. The case exposed a hidden world where wealthy parents paid enormous sums to guarantee their children's entry into elite universities, using fraud, cheating, and bribes to tilt the system in their favor. For Huffman, the revelation was devastating. The actress who had played a desperate housewife on screen had become, in reality, a desperate parent willing to break the law to secure her child's future. Huffman was born in 1962 in Bedford, New York, the youngest of 8 children. She grew up in a privileged but fractured household. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she often spoke of her struggles with self-confidence. Her passion for acting developed early, and after studying at the Interlochen Arts Academy and New York University, she pursued theater. She became a regular presence in the New York stage scene during the 1980s and 1990s, earning respect for her talent and commitment. Television eventually brought her wider fame. Roles in shows like Sports Night and Frasier showcased her versatility, but it was Desperate Housewives that catapulted her into mainstream stardom in 2004. Playing Lynette Scavo, Huffman embodied the role of a relatable, overworked mother navigating the chaos of family life. The performance earned her critical acclaim, an Emmy Award, and worldwide recognition. Off-screen, Huffman seemed to embody the very role she played, a devoted mother balancing career and family. She and Macy raised two daughters, Sophia and Georgia, largely shielded from Hollywood's glare. But like many parents, Huffman worried about her children's futures, particularly their chances of getting into prestigious colleges. It was that anxiety that led her down a path of deception. The scandal centered on William Rick Singer, a college admissions consultant who orchestrated a vast scheme to help wealthy families game the system. Singer offered two main services: bribing coaches to falsely designate students as athletic recruits and facilitating cheating on standardized tests. Huffman opted for the latter. According to court documents, Huffman paid $15,000 to Singer's organization to arrange for her older daughter's SAT exam to be rigged. A proctor was bribed to correct the girl's answers after she completed the test, ensuring an inflated score. Huffman even considered doing the same for her younger daughter, but ultimately decided against it. When the FBI revealed the scheme in March 2019, Huffman's name was among dozens of wealthy parents indicted, including executives, lawyers, and another high-profile actress, Lori Loughlin. The revelation shocked the public. Huffman, who had cultivated a reputation as authentic and relatable, had used her wealth and privilege to secure advantages for her daughter that were unavailable to ordinary families. For many, it crystallized a deep frustration with inequality in education and society at large. The fallout was immediate. Huffman issued a public apology, admitting her guilt and expressing remorse. Unlike some other parents caught in the scandal, she chose not to fight the charges or deny wrongdoing. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services mail fraud, acknowledging that her actions had undermined trust in the admissions system and harmed students who worked hard to earn their places honestly. In September 2019, Huffman stood before a judge for sentencing. Prosecutors recommended a month in prison, while her attorneys argued for community service. The judge ultimately sentenced her to 14 days in federal prison, a $30,000 fine, 250 hours of community service, and 1 year of supervised release. Huffman reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, in October 2019. She served 11 days before being released early for good behavior. While her prison term was short, the damage to her reputation was long-lasting. The scandal had stripped away her carefully cultivated image, leaving her career in limbo. The public's reaction to Huffman's case was mixed. Some saw her as a symbol of privilege and corruption, proof that the wealthy were willing to cheat to give their children unfair advantages. Others acknowledged her quick acceptance of responsibility and contrasted her contrition with the defiance of other parents, particularly Loughlin, who fought the charges for over a year before being convicted. For Huffman, the aftermath became a period of reflection and quiet rebuilding. She returned to acting slowly, taking on smaller projects while maintaining a low public profile. Her husband, William H. Macy, stood by her throughout the ordeal, but the scandal inevitably cast a shadow over both their careers. The haunting takeaway from Huffman's story is not one of violence or greed, but of fear. The fear of not being enough, of one's children not measuring up, of losing ground in an increasingly competitive world. Her crime reflected the anxieties of countless parents, magnified by wealth and privilege into something criminal. It revealed how deeply the pressure to succeed permeates even the lives of those who seemingly have everything. Huffman's fall from grace was swift, and though she avoided a lengthy prison term, her legacy remains tied to the scandal. She will always be remembered not only for her acting talent, but for the moment when her desperation as a parent eclipsed her better judgment. In the end, her story is a reminder that even small crimes, committed out of fear or love, can carry devastating consequences when they undermine the values of fairness and trust. For more real-life crime stories, subscribe and stay tuned for the next deep dive.